Virginia just stopped using touchscreen computer voting because it's so vulnerable.
Right.
We need to look at all the voting machines. Every Secretary of State needs to be, assisted in making sure that they are not being hacked and attacked.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling this.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risk.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors.
We know how vulnerable now our systems were. I know the hackathon that took place last year, where virtually every machine was broken into fairly quickly.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines. Those that are being used in many states.
Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In a close presidential election, they just need to hack one swing state, or maybe 1 or 2, or maybe just a few counties in one swing state.
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through. You have 21 states that were hacked into. They didn't find out about it for a year.
Right now, we have over a dozen states that either don't have any backup paper ballots or only have them partially. Do you think that our adversaries don't know what those states are? Of course they know what those states are. And if we have a close election, in the general election, in a presidential race, and one state's outstanding, and their ballot boxes gets hacked into, their elections get hacked into, we will have absolutely no backup.
I know America's voting machines are vulnerable because my colleagues and I have hacked them repeatedly. We've created attacks that can spread from machine to machine like a computer virus and silently change election outcomes. And in every single case, we've found ways for attackers to sabotage machines and to steal votes.
Across the country, there are about 52 different models of machines. They fall into essentially 2 styles, ones that scan a piece of paper or ones where the voter just interacts with a touch screen. And many of them have been analyzed now by researchers looking for security vulnerabilities. In every single case where a U.S. voting machine has been analyzed by competent security researchers, they have found vulnerabilities that would let someone inject malicious software and change election data. Every single case.
The better or the more efficient way of hacking machines would be to subvert them all through the machine that's used to actually program those machines. So prior to each election, the county election office or the voting machine vendor will actually program memory cards for that election. It tells the machine who are the candidates, what are the contests being decided, and that gets inserted into the voting machine. If you can subvert that machine that is used to program those memory cards, then you can pass rogue software to the voting machine.
Voting machines are not connected to the internet. This is something that you hear all the time in the US from election officials. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. And many new voting machines come with 4G wireless modems so that they can be connected to the internet from the polling place in order to upload the results faster. Now, to me, that sounds crazy. Why would you want to put your voting machines on the internet right in the middle of the election, potentially at the most vulnerable time?
Studies conducted in 2007 by the state of California, state of Ohio, state of Florida found security vulnerabilities that could take advantage of these to engineer viruses, where one compromised voting machine could then infect eventually the entire fleet of machines for an entire county. Typically at the end of the election day, you move a memory card through each of the machines in the precinct, and that's to collect the vote totals. That process can spread a virus. And there are other processes. The details vary from machine to machine.
When you say hacked, what were they able to do once they gained access to the machines?
Oh, all sorts of things. They could manipulate the outcome of the vote. They could manipulate the tally. They could delete the tally. And they could compromise the vote in any number of ways.
The machines used in Georgia have been demonstrated to be hackable through a virus that's carried on ballot definition cartridges, very much like the Stuxnet virus was inserted into nuclear centrifuges in Iran.
There are a number of states that outsource their reporting of elections to third parties, some of which are corporations based in other countries like Spain. So you've got to trust that the aggregation of the votes and the reporting of the votes is accurate as well.
I'm pretty sure my undergrad computer security class at Michigan could have changed the outcome of the 2016 Michigan election if we wanted to. It is that bad. And we have a combination of very powerful adversaries and unfortunately quite vulnerable and obsolete systems. That's why I say it's only a matter of time.
Unfortunately, in a lot of these systems, the audit trails are just as vulnerable as the other aspects of the system, so there may not be good forensic evidence of a successful intrusion. With the current design, we cannot be universally confident that it hasn't happened. And it's probably only a matter of time before it will.
In at least 40 states, elections are carried out using machines that are at least a decade old, and like any technology, they're susceptible to increasing failure with age. Some state officials have had to turn to eBay to find critical components like dot matrix printers, decades-old storage devices, and analog modems. Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In 2016, state election websites in Illinois and Arizona were hacked by intruders who installed malware and downloaded sensitive voter information.
It is worth fighting for integrity in our election system, which means that they are free from interference by a hostile or an unfriendly nation. Let's put the resources into upgrading the state's elections systems. Because what we know is this, there are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked. I sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Homeland Security Committee. And we receive all kinds of information about the vulnerabilities to our national security. We are vulnerable in terms of foreign interference with our elections.
It's my understanding that some of the election system vendors have required states to sign agreements that prevent or inhibit independent security testing. There's a saying that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is the difference between being hacked and not being hacked is knowing you've been hacked.
And they are still looking for ways to steal information about voter registration, for example. There are some tax experts in Silicon Valley with whom I have met who say that maybe what they'll do this next time is to really disrupt the actual election, shut down the servers that you send results to, interfere with the operation of voting machines, because still too many of them are linked to the internet. So we are still very vulnerable.
I mean, I can tell you in Virginia when I was governor, I had to replace all the machines because I remember when I first voted, when I went to Richmond, moved down as governor, I remember I kept voting in the Senate race, kept voting for the Democrat, Republican name kept coming up. 3 times that happened.
What do you mean kept coming up?
So, we had the touch screens. I was voting for Mark Warner, our senator. And Ed Gillespie's name would light up. Happened to me 3 times. Finally, the 4th time, Mark's name, and I quickly hit vote, and I got out of there. All the cameras are looking at me like, this guy doesn't know how to vote. I mean, what's going on? So then I had an investigation done, and listen to this. I brought in some technology experts. They were able to hack into our machines from off-site in about 5 or 6 minutes, and within 4 minutes, they were able to change a vote. I decertified all the machines. Now in Virginia, we have paper ballots.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors. These companies are accountable to no one. They won't answer basic questions about their cybersecurity practices, and the biggest companies won't answer any questions at all. 5 states have no paper trail, and that means there is no way to prove the numbers the voting machines put out are legitimate. So much for Cybersecurity 101.
The vast majority of 10,000 election jurisdictions nationwide use election management systems that run on old software that is soon going to be out of date and ripe for exploitation by hackers, according to an exhaustive analysis by the Associated Press. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Arizona, and North Carolina, among others, are all at risk. Even the state of Georgia, which just passed legislation to buy new voting machines, is on track to buy equipment that suffers from this significant cybersecurity weakness.
Let's say the election is decided by a small percentage, and people in America don't think that the election was fair. The effect that would have on our 200-year experiment in self-governance, our democratic system would take a real hit. Our elections weren't secure last week, and they sure as heck aren't secure this week. And anybody who says otherwise is either selling you voting machines or simply has a malicious intent towards our elections. At one point in the Intelligence Committee, both sides seemed to agree that no votes were changed in the 2016 election. And I said, the experts I talked to say that until you have a forensic analysis of a vote, until you go in there and scrub the whole system, you can't really say that.
These machines don't have a capability of providing you forensic evidence to see if they cannot prove they were honest, they cannot prove that they have been hacked. They simply don't have the fundamental basic capabilities of providing you that forensic evidence, that data. Only way you can see that that machine was hacked if the attacker wanted to be found that it was hacked. That's a sad truth. So anyone who says, I have information one way or another, that's an opinion, that's not fact-based. Fact is, it can be done without leaving trace.
When you know how the systems work, looking for the evidence, you know that you won't find it because the systems are not recording, generating, preserving, or protecting meaningful forensic evidence. And this is from the very beginning to the end of the process everywhere. These systems really don't have a capability of recording and protecting any meaningful audit information or forensically important information. So a lot of times I would also argue that even if you try to take a look into the evidence, the problem is that there is no evidence which is trustworthy and worth analyzing.
We've heard a lot from voting machine vendors and election officials that voting machines can't be hacked because they're not connected to the internet. All of those vulnerabilities that Andrew talked about are not a problem because no one can access the machines. And it turns out that that message that they've been giving us for years, and particularly after the 2016 election, just isn't true. Voting machine vendors have sold election officials on these in use of modems. In some cases, the modems are embedded inside the voting machines. In another case, they're external modems that get attached to the voting machine at the end of the election. So at the end of the election, the machine goes into shutdown mode, and then this option pops up about modeming results. And so the system will automatically then dial in and send these votes over a cellular modem to a server on the internet that collects the results. So everyone will tell you, and they've told me every time I've spoken with them, that cellular modems are not really internet connectivity. They will say, that doesn't mean that the machine is connected to the internet, it's using a cellular modem. Well, that's not true. And Election Systems and Software, which is the top voting machine maker in the country, this is one of their statements over and over again with the public. But this is one of their own diagrams that they actually gave to Rhode Island in 2015. And if you see that circular part in the center there showing that modem transmission using a wireless modem, they sit there, right there. It's on their own diagram that it's going over the internet.
Before every election officials have to program the voting machines with who's on the ballot and what are the rules for counting. Well, they make that election programming on a PC workstation somewhere, either at the jurisdiction or at an outside vendor that does it for them. If an attacker can break into that workstation, which is called an election management system, they can spread malicious code to all of the memory cards used to program all of the voting machines in the jurisdiction. And those election management system workstations sometimes are connected to the internet, or the data that's programmed into them passes through an internet-connected system. So we're just 1 or 2 hops away from an online attacker. So if I wanted to break into this company, let's say I was the attacker, I'd probably start by forging an email from, let's say, Larry, the president here, to Sue, his administrative assistant, asking her to urgently open an attachment. Now, of course, when she does, that attachment has my malware in it. I have a foothold into their network, and I can try to spread from there to the election management system and to the voting machines in most of the state. Tampering with the national election result in my country is easier than even I thought in 2016. I keep learning things that convince me that the situation is scarier than even experts had thought. You identify the states that are most weakly protected and going to be close, target the computers that are going to program voting machines there, spread malware to machines to change a fraction of the votes, and then rely on the fact that most states, even if they have a paper record, are not going to rigorously use it to check that the computers are right. But the fact is that in close national contests in the US, the result really only hinges on the result in a small number of states. You've heard about the swing states in any given election, the ones that are really competitive. In such a situation, an attacker can, before the election, identify which states are likely to be close, try probing all of them in the way that the Russians did the voter registration systems in 2016, and just find the weakest swing states and attack there. So in this way, the American system converts diversity of implementation into basically this patchwork of strength and weakness that gives attackers a menu of possible places to strike. It makes us weaker in close elections.
Modems in voting machines are a bad idea. Those modems are network connections, and that leaves them vulnerable to hacking by anybody who can connect to that network.
ES&S insists while there are 14,000 of its modems in use, there are firewalls separating those modems from the public internet.
Once a hacker starts talking to the voting machine through the modem, they can hack the software in the voting machine and make it cheat in future elections.
What is the vehicle for the transmission from the ICP? Is it cellular modem versus VPN?
It is a cellular modem that can be configured in a VPN, right? And we currently in Chicago and Cook County, we work with Verizon to secure that network.
What wireless chipset / modem does the hardware have?
We support a variety. It's really up to the jurisdictions what technology they want to use, what's compatible with their networks.
Currently, in some jurisdictions, we're using basically a modem that is a 3G modem, GSM. but we can support multiple varieties of modem that can be.
Including latest 4G standards as well.
So that answers the next question. Is it 3G or 4G? Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint? I'm assuming all?
Yeah, all networks. Right. Just
We
as a point of
have
fact,
CDMA,
yeah. I mean, we actually transmit from the ICP in Mongolia as well, so we're not limited in networks.
And in Puerto Rico, there is 3 vendors because the island is not covered by any of the vendors completely. So we use 3 different cellular vendors for some ICPs with this vendor, Claro, AT&T, and T-Mobile, I think, in the different parts of the island. So.
More modern voting machines, they actually have a mobile phone modem in the speak. They have a mobile phone connectivity to county headquarters. They are sending the results.
Some jurisdictions are relying on uploading election results using cellular modems or the internet. That, of course, introduces another point of vulnerability, not just to the data that's flowing, but also to the software, the devices that are being connected.
Many of these voting machines have modems embedded into them, and the modems are used at the end of the election to transmit the vote totals on election night to the county elections office. So these modems contact, they're cellular modems, and they contact the cellular network, they contact a cell tower. So the cell tower traffic these days in our modern times actually goes through internet. It goes through the same kinds of routers and switches that the regular internet traffic goes to. But also in between that cell tower and that voting machine, an intruder can intercept data going to the cell tower and intercept that communication, that phone call. If you can trick a voting machine into contacting your device, your fake cellular tower, instead of a legitimate tower, you can actually use that connection to get back into the voting machine and get back into the tabulator and then alter votes and software.
So just to review, you look at the polls before the election and figure out which states were likely to be close, probe all of them, find the ones with the weakest protection, then hack into the election management systems there or at the outside vendors the states use. Once you hack into the election management system, you can spread malicious code to individual voting machines and have your code say swap 10% of the votes in the places you infected. Then even if the votes are also recorded on a piece of paper, you don't have to worry, because in most of those states, they're going to just toss the paper out without looking at it.